Why do you say sorry when someone else bumps into you? Why does asking a simple question come out sounding like an apology first? Most people assume sorry means you did something wrong. It usually doesn't. It's become a reflex, not an admission. Here's where that reflex actually came from. Think about how many times you've said sorry today. Not for something you actually did. For asking a question at work. For needing someone to repeat themselves. For simply being in a hallway when someone else was walking through it. For having an opinion that was different from someone else's. For someone else's mistake, a wrong order at a restaurant, a bump on a crowded train. For crying. For being tired. For taking up 2 extra seconds of someone's time. None of those things needed an apology. And yet the word comes out anyway, fast, automatic, before you've even decided to say it. This isn't politeness. Politeness is a choice. What you're doing is a reflex, and reflexes get built for a reason. Sometimes it's not one household but a wider pattern. Being taught early that being agreeable was safer than being right. That taking up less space, sounding less certain, made you easier to be around, easier to forgive and advance. Here's where this one usually comes from. For a lot of people, sorry wasn't originally about wrongdoing at all. It was about safety. Maybe you grew up around someone whose mood could shift without warning. Worked, and any perceived slight, even an accidental one, could set off something bigger than the moment deserved. So you learned to apologize before the reaction even started. Not because you were guilty. Because saying sorry first sometimes stopped things from escalating. It became a kind of shield, a preemptive move to keep the peace before it broke. Maybe it wasn't a person at all, but a household where tension hung in the air. Unpredictable and never explained. You learned to scan for that tension and get ahead of it, sorry loaded and ready before anyone even asked for one. Over time, that shield stopped being something you consciously used. It became automatic, triggered by anything that might be interpreted as a problem. Whether it actually was one or not. Even decades later, in situations with people who were never unpredictable at all. The old reflex still fires, because your nervous system never got the memo that the danger is over. Here's what almost nobody explains about this pattern. Apologizing for things that aren't your fault isn't humility. It's a trained assumption. That you are probably the problem, by default, until proven otherwise. That assumption runs quietly underneath almost every interaction. Whether you're aware of it or not. It shows up as apologizing for your own needs. As if needing something is an inconvenience you owe people for. It shows up as apologizing for taking up space, physically, conversationally, emotionally. It shows up as apologizing for feelings. As if sadness or frustration are things you should have prevented somehow. It can even show up at work, apologizing before giving feedback that was actually requested. Softening a valid point until it barely registers as one. None of that is actually about being polite. It's about believing, somewhere underneath, that you're responsible for managing everyone else's reactions to you. Think about what this costs over time. Every unnecessary sorry reinforces the same belief a little more. That you are, by default, slightly in the wrong. Slightly too much, slightly a burden to be managed. Said enough times, that belief stops feeling like a belief. It starts feeling like a fact about who you are. It can even start showing up in how you introduce yourself, apologizing for your own name if someone mishears it. As if being misheard was somehow something you did wrong. People around you can start to absorb that message too, without ever meaning to. If you constantly apologize for existing, some people will eventually start treating you like existing near them is something to apologize for. Not because that's true. Because you kept insisting on it, quietly, 100 times a day, until it became the accepted story. There's another cost too, one that's easy to miss. Sorry can quietly replace actually addressing what happened. A rushed, sorry, said reflexively often skips the real conversation entirely. The one about what's actually needed next. It becomes a way to smooth things over fast, instead of a way to actually take responsibility for something real. Ironically, the reflex apology can end up meaning less than an apology that's actually earned. When you say sorry for everything, the word stops carrying any real weight for the moments that actually deserve it. Here's what changes once you see this pattern clearly. Not every uncomfortable moment is your fault to manage. Someone else's mood, someone else's inconvenience, someone else's reaction. These are not automatically your responsibility. You are allowed to exist in a hallway. You are allowed to ask a question. You are allowed to need something repeated, to have an opinion, to take up your fair share of space. None of that requires an apology, even if the old reflex insists otherwise. So what does it actually look like to interrupt this pattern? The first step is simply noticing the reflex before it fully leaves your mouth. Catching the word sorry forming and pausing just long enough to ask a real question. Did I actually do something wrong here, or am I just afraid of someone's reaction to something neutral? That pause alone starts to create distance between the reflex and the words that follow it. From there, try replacing unnecessary apologies with neutral language instead. Thanks for waiting, instead of, sorry I'm late, when the situation genuinely doesn't call for guilt. Can you say that again? Instead of, sorry, what? When you simply didn't hear something the first time. These small substitutions matter more than they seem. Because language shapes belief over time, not just the other way around. It also helps to notice how it feels to leave a moment unsmoothed, without immediately softening it with an apology. That discomfort is worth sitting with, at least for a few seconds, instead of rushing to fix it automatically. It might feel like the air in the room has gone slightly tense, even when nothing has actually gone wrong. That tension is old familiar, and rarely about the present moment at all. Discomfort in that gap isn't proof you did something wrong. It's proof of how deeply the old reflex is wired, and how unfamiliar its absence still feels. Give yourself permission to let a moment stay slightly uncomfortable sometimes, without rescuing everyone from it, including yourself. The people worth being around were never actually keeping score of your unnecessary apologies in the first place. You are not responsible for preventing every possible reaction someone else might have to your existence. That job was never actually yours to carry, even if you were handed it a long time ago. If you've spent years apologizing for things that were never your fault, that pattern can still change. It starts with noticing the reflex, one moment at a time, without judging yourself for how automatic it's become. Every time you let a moment stay as it is, without rushing to apologize for it, the old pattern loosens. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens one pause sorry, one neutral sentence, one small risk at a time. If this explains something you've never had words for, you're far from the only one carrying this. So many people are quietly apologizing right now for things that were never actually their fault to begin with. Subscribe if this hit home, because there's more where this came from. And next time, we'll talk about what it actually looks like to take up space without apologizing for it.